believe that he was doing it in the right way. And many of you may not know this, but Tiffany was bought at one point by Avon, and they nearly destroyed the company. So think about that. You purchase one of the great brands of our time, but you don't understand the culture, and they bought themselves back to save themselves. So how do you move an icon? I'd like to tell you 10 very short stories, because the privilege I've had is to work with some of the great companies and icons of our time as they've tried to become something that is relevant to the future. You have to rediscover the heart. How many of you know this brand? How many of you know that this brand it's got a sound. It also nearly went out of business. It was bought by a company called AMF, which does bowling balls and makes engines for boats. And they didn't understand the icon. And the company began to fail. It was losing money. It was laying off people. It almost went out of business. It was within days of going out of business. The reason was that they took the brand out into the world. And just as you saw in our first presentation, there's the sense of moving out into the world with dignity. Well, they didn't do that. In Japan, Harleys became babes with bikes. In Germany, they're talking about, I don't know what they're talking about. And when I met with the company, I said, how has this happened? What do you tell people who are going to take your brand into the world? How do you explain what's true to the icon? And they said, if you have to ask, you wouldn't understand. Now think about that. While you appreciate the sense of growing up with a brand, you can't expect a global economy to take up your brand and then, if they don't understand it, say, I can't help you. So we went forward to say, we have to explain what Harley means. And we did that by trying to get into the minds of the people who own the icon, the customers, famous customers like Jay Leno. We talked to people who came to the rallies, everyday people who bought and loved Harleys. And we talked to them all over the world. Just a few quotes from Japan. It's a breed apart. You want to show off your Harley. You don't mind being seen. And this is something mystical. The mystique says something about you. In Italy, it represents a special mood, a truth. In England, the mystique starts from the moment you get on the motorcycle. We found that people universally who experienced Harley could explain the brand, but the people who owned the brand couldn't. So we set out to do that. And we picked 3 words which we felt embodied the ideas of Harley: individualism, adventure, and fulfillment. And by the way, this corporate identity manual is probably the only one in the world that's traded, you can buy them on eBay, that actually people want, because it really captures the spirit of Harley. Now, it was noticed in the marketplace. The newspapers started to write, Harley-Davidson sharpens its focus. They used to make RVs, recreational vehicles, did you know that? They dropped them. They licensed their brand to anyone. So they went back and they got rid of things like Harley cigarettes because it didn't fit adventure, idealism, and individualism. Parts. When you own a Harley, it's about customizing it. They had licensed their brand to so many people that you would get parts that were no good. They took all that back and we created different tiers, very basic, competition, and very collectible, all branded as genuine Harley. So suddenly, the Harley voice, the sense of the truth of the icon, began to come through. Since we were no longer just talking about the bike, we could begin to think of things like motor clothes. They were launched. Harley cafes. I don't know if anyone here has been to one, but you didn't have to ride the bike to be part of the experience. And the website became a place where people who believed in this idea of Harley could gather and talk about the brand, and then find places to share the experience. This is a very unusual brand. Many of you, as you define brands, will end up writing standards, explaining the brand. You'll use terrible, boring language. You'll sanitize the things you say. Don't do that. Speak in the voice of the brand. Here, the legend begins with a call, a challenge that rouses the searchers from the routines of life and puts them on the road to discovery and adventure. This is a corporate identity manual. It's explaining the heart of the brand.
Word on the street was they were a bad bet. An American institution, just 3 days shy of extinction. Only one investment firm, Dean Witter, saw past the problems to the real value of the company. And a rumor is heard round Wall